because like everything else, it's all about learning and growing and going through those growing pains and learning from those and keep charging forward. So this is really exciting to be able to do this today. I want to share that something that's interesting. I'm often asked, what's the difference between diversity and inclusion? And people use the terms as one. And I think one of the easiest ways to think of it is diversity by its very nature can be measured, which probably bodes well for this group, right? It could be measured by recruiting numbers or attrition numbers or programs that a given company or organization is supporting. Inclusion, however, needs to be nurtured. It doesn't automatically happen. So one would say diversity is inviting somebody to a party, and inclusion is asking that person to dance and to sit at the table and to have dinner together and to have a conversation. And so inclusion really is critical to the growth and progress of any organization. And here you see the representation of your leaders who really are focused on supporting inclusion. I think as human beings, we have a natural need to feel a sense of belonging, and that's where inclusion begins. And so our hope then today, after today, is to take everything we're learning, as you'll see the URL for digital questions you'd like to submit. Those that are not answered today, we will certainly address within the next week, and you can just go back to the site and find the answer to your question. And then also, if anybody has any other non-questions, you can reach me at diversity@neurips.cc, and we'll be happy to have a dialogue. I think, fundamentally, diversity is about dialogue. Without dialogue, there will not be any change. The numbers won't change. Inclusion definitely will not happen if there isn't an open dialogue. And more importantly, people to be willing to have that open dialogue. So this is a year of transition for NeurIPS. It's quite exciting, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. So what I do is we'll introduce the panelists, and we already have a number of questions that have been submitted. Feel free to continue to submit them, and we'll just continue the dialogue, whether it's starting today, but I think this is the beginning of some really cool things that NeurIPS can do for all communities, because what your work touches global communities every day. It's almost as if it's the year that science and diversity are merging, converging, because now more and more your work touches everybody around the world every day in your daily lives. So with that, I want to introduce these great folks who have really taken leadership roles, active leadership roles for NeurIPS to foster inclusion, really. And that's just so important to your work. So on my far right is William Agnew. He's here representing Queer and AI. And then we have Timney, did I pronounce your last name? Gebro, okay, Gebro. And she's a leader in Black and AI. And then to my right is Uli von Luxburg, who is a member of the board of the NeurIPS Foundation. To my left is Laura Montoya, who's a lead for the Latinx at AI. Then we also have Sarah Osentowski, who's with WIML, which is a Women in Machine Learning. And then on my far left is Max Welling, who's also a member of the board. So with that, I think we're just going to jump right in. This is really a conversation. And again, feel free to submit any questions, or feel free to send me an email at diversity@neurips.cc if you have any other questions or ideas. All ideas are welcome, because this is, again, the transition year to some really great things that could happen with your input. So I'm going to start off, and Uli, let me ask you, why now? Why this year?
Why we have this meeting this year?
Why are we talking about diversity and inclusion at NeurIPS this year?
So, I mean, the conference has been growing tremendously during the past years, and it became very apparent that we need to change our structures and to adapt to all the needs that come up. And before we can do that, we need to know what's going on in our community, and we need to learn what are the problems, and this is why we are here.
Okay, great. Does anybody else want to speak to Max?
Yeah, I could say something. So I guess what's important is that the world is changing in a good way. And we are changing with the world, and we're catching up with this wave. And we are here, I think the board is here to just listen to you, just listen to all your concerns, and we will take all those concerns with us to the board meetings, and we'll try to implement more changes for the community.
Great, thanks. So one of the questions that came in is why is diversity and inclusion important in AI? Timothy, you want to take that? Or
Well, I think you mentioned one of the points where all of our products are affecting, we have international global companies now that are affecting many different people. And the first thing I want to say is that even if you don't think about diversity and inclusion per se, and you want to have an international conference, and you want to have people from all over the world just attend the conference, we're not even talking about feeling included or something like that. If you don't have diverse groups of people represented, you're going to have no idea what kinds of roadblocks they have to just attend this conference. Right, so that's one. In terms of having diversity in AI in general, I mean, we even had a talk yesterday about bias and in algorithms, for example, in machine learning, et cetera. My own work shows that computer vision, automated face recognition tools don't work well. They almost approach random chance as you go darker and darker in skin tone for Black women. And the reason this happened is because the set of researchers we have and the data sets that we're using and all these things are very biased. So we're overfitting, basically. And there's even examples with papers we wrote with Hannah and other people where you can extrapolate to other industries. You can see that, let's say clinical trials did not have women, for example. And so now we know that 8 out of the 10 drugs that were pulled out of the market between 2008 and 2010 disproportionately affected women, right? Seatbelts were, they were cars. Oh, and Hal also was on that paper. Cars were not, sorry? And Jen, where's Jen? Jen is here too. Yes, sorry. Cars were disproportionately killing women and children because we didn't test them on women and children. So our products are affecting different groups of people, and we can inadvertently be harming these different groups of people if we don't have these different groups of people represented.
Willie, did you want to answer?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, great. So one of the questions came through was on the topic of intersectionality, and how does what does intersectionality mean, and how does that play into AI and NeurIPS? Laura, would you like to take that?
Sure. So in general, intersectionality is about every aspect of your personality and your life experience that you can bring to the table. So for example, for me personally, I'm a woman, I'm Latina, my father's from Colombia, I was born and raised in the US, I identify as queer. So all of these things make up who I am and my identity. And they are part of myself when I bring my whole self to the table, not only in my work, but then also in my daily life with the people that I interact with. So why is that important in artificial intelligence? Well, if you don't necessarily, again, consider all these different things that you are bringing to the table or the people around you are bringing to the table when they come to work, when they're developing products, when they're making things for a larger user group and a larger user base and how that's going to affect them or the other people around them, then that is also a problem. So having someone that can own that intersectionality, now that is something that's very beneficial, right? And can really help not only yourself, but then help them also experience other people and understand them when you're developing and doing your research as well.
Great. Okay, one of the questions we have here is about affinity groups. And why are affinity groups important and how do they evolve? Sarah?
So affinity groups give underrepresented groups at NeurIPS an opportunity to come to a place where they see people who are like them and present their technical work. And it also gives a place to see the technical work that we might not be seeing and when we watch the majority of the posters or the talks presented. And so WIML started as a way to highlight, for example, the technical work of women, and that our conferences, our workshop is entirely talks that women have done research, and at least one person is going to be a woman on that paper.
Someone else like to talk about the growth of their affinity group and the effects on the participants?
Yeah, so I'm the current chair of Queer and AI. Our affinity group has really created and established a space for queer people at NeurIPS. I feel that when I arrived here, the community was in a kind of strange place where, yeah, queer people were accepted in many areas where the conference was being hosted, but also, like, I couldn't name a famous queer AI scientist who hadn't committed suicide over 70 years ago. So I feel that our community has grown very quickly and very organically because a lot of people recognized the need for this. And people keep telling me, they're like, thank you, this is so wonderful. I feel like I'm meeting people like myself. I feel much more recognized and respected.
So I wanted to touch on the two things you mentioned, which is really important for Black and AI, intersectionality and the growth. So in our conference, in our workshop this year, we have, members traveling from all over the world. And the issues they face are very different. We have a speaker coming from the US where he was wrongfully convicted of a crime 2 times, so he can't travel, he can't come here, right? So he's presenting remotely. And then, people coming from the US don't have visa problems. And they might, even though they're Black, they might not know anything about other, visa problems that Africans are having. And then people traveling from African countries are having all sorts of visa issues, but they might not know anything about the kinds of criminalization of Black people in the US, right? And also, even if you're in one particular underrepresented group, doesn't mean that you're not gonna have some sort of bias towards other people. So we deal, even in Black Now, we deal with sexism and bullying and all of the other things that we see here. So it's really important to address that issue of intersectionality.
Great, thank you. I want to bring up something. I was having a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about the queer efforts and the participants, and someone brought up something I thought was quite fascinating in that members of NeurIPS who come to the conference who are queer are not comfortable coming out, or people knowing that they're queer at this conference. And so I think that's kind of interesting that it's a great resource to have those people feel more included and maybe more comfortable moving forward to be able just to own, what their identity is. A little more on affinity groups. I could just speak from my personal experience. I started the Latinat at Facebook years ago, and there were 6 of us at the time. And people often say, well, how come you need your own special group? And how come you guys have your own meetings by yourself? And I can just speak from my experience in that there's a lot to be said for being in a room with people who look like you, who may have a similar background. And there's a sense of empowerment that we get from these efforts to be able to go out into large groups that may not be representative of our communities. And so I just wanted to shed some light, because that does seem to come up a lot, like, well, how come this even needs to happen? But when we're often the only one at the table in an organization, it is extraordinarily difficult. It's really, really hard. But to be able to go back and talk to colleagues who really understand that challenge is empowering to, be like, okay, I can do it again. I can get back out there. So I just wanted to give you a little background.
I'd also like to add something also from the board point of perspective. It's of course great to have all these groups, because there are so many different affinity groups and we are not aware of what all the problems are. And it's much easier for us to address these problems if there are sort of interfaces which have been defined and we know with whom to work, and like the person on the other side also knows about the problem. So it's much easier for us to get a grip on the different problems if there are these groups which help us to identify what's going on.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the previous point. As a gay computer scientist, I did not even hear about a living queer computer scientist further along their career path than me until I was 23. And even then, they were, still mostly closeted. And it's really only been in the past year that I've met queer computer scientists who are, maybe assistant professors or startup CEOs, or people that show me that I can be myself and be successful. And I think that's had not being able to relate to other people or see that you will be accepted has had a large negative impact on our community and others.
So maybe I can also add something on the flip side. So the flip side is that if you're not in a minority group, you have a blind spot. And it's only actually through all the things that happened that I discovered this blind spot, which was interesting. I was starting to talk to my students, my female students, and ask them, okay, so why do you feel uncomfortable at a conference like NeurIPS? And I learned a lot of really interesting things. So we have a blind spot, and in fact, maybe you could say the board had a blind spot for having a blind spot in some sense.
That's great, yes.
So it's important that you brought up that blind spot, because that blind spot also exists. That's why intersectionality is important, right? So personally, I'm still learning about my blind spots for the issues that people in our communities face. So for example, with Black and AI, there is a reason we pay in advance for people's visa, we book hotels, we book flights, because otherwise then we would just end up with all Black people from the US who are rich, straight, that so it's important for all of us to address our blind spots. And you were talking about growth. So in 2016, I went to Barcelona, and I was like, oh my God, this is an international conference. Do I see any Black people? I didn't. And I was just counting 1, 2, 3, and I counted like 5, right? Or maybe 6, including me. And that feeling of exclusion, it's just like wearing my scarf or dancing, which I like to do, just the feeling of the fact that you're not really allowed to be yourself is a feeling that you're walking into someone else's house, and so you can't really participate in. So it's really important for us to work on the inclusion part of things as well, to make sure that everyone feels welcome and included here.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I really agree with you, Max. Being an ally is not about being perfect. Being an ally is about recognizing that you are imperfect, you are biased, and working to improve yourself. Everyone has biases. It doesn't make you an irredeemable person.
I also want to add, with being an ally, especially for people that come from different countries, oftentimes will speak another language primarily, right, as their first language. And so we've experienced that a lot for the Latinx community. Oftentimes it's really hard for people to come here from South and Central America because they're afraid that they're not necessarily going to be understood very well, right? They have a very strong accent. They're used to writing their work and presenting their work in Spanish or Portuguese, for example. And so coming here, oftentimes they don't feel as confident speaking, representing themselves. And oftentimes when they do as well, and people can't necessarily understand them, right, they kind of just brush them off, move on with the conversation, and again, they feel left out and they're not included in that situation. So if you're going to be a very good ally for others, it's often important to take time to really try to listen to someone, practice those active listening skills. If you can't understand them, just say, hey, would you mind repeating that again? Slow down, but like really show that you're interested in hearing them, right? So that they understand that they're also valuable in this space, and it's very important for them to be here and to share their work as well. And something that, for me personally, living in the San Francisco area, I often think it's kind of crazy that if you live and work in the Bay Area, right? If you work for any of these large tech companies, like you're thought of as, a really big deal, right? But there are people, obviously, in many other parts of the world that are doing the same exact work, sometimes better work as researchers, as academics, as technologists, but they're not taken as seriously, they're not thought of as valuable just because they're not in the US or they're not in San Francisco. So that's also something to consider when people are coming here from other countries, that they are as valuable, their work is just as important, and that you should take them seriously and ensure that you are including them in these conversations.
Well, along those lines, one thing, again, this year, everyone's learning a lot, and one of the new benefits this year as a result of the diversity co-chairs of Hal and Kat is childcare. And so it was brought to my attention that the issue of language barriers has become an issue with childcare, particularly regarding Spanish speakers. So it's my understanding that today the care providers speak English and French, but a lot of the children there need a Spanish speaker. So it's just, again, it's a year of learning, take note for next year and to plan accordingly, but thank you for sharing all these different perspectives. So I'm going to take another question. Unfortunately, I need my glasses. Okay. What actions can the rest of the community take to help best support your organization in diversity and inclusion in general? Anybody?
So for Black AI, we have a list, and it's for members and allies. And allies can do a number of things. For example, Reddit has spearheaded a mentorship program where we have, people applying to grad schools. And Laura, I'm really glad you mentioned this because many people from different countries, they don't have the funds to apply for certain types of grad schools or the application. They don't, we have a lot of knowledge just because we're networking, and I'm learning from you just being by being present here. But a lot of people don't know how to properly write their essays or anything, and so even if they're so qualified and they're really good, they don't know how to. They don't know what the recipe is. And even for our papers for this conference and others, there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a recipe that you follow to get your papers in. Unfortunately, even if your work is great, and if you don't really quite know how to do that, you might not get it in. So we need allies for this mentorship program. Money, donations, but also this work takes so much time. I mean, Laura was saying she spent 3 months full time just to work on this workshop. I spent, sorry, Sammy, most of my time on this particular workshop, and running the organization. And this is not my job. I'm a researcher. I'm a research scientist. Not Laura's job. She's an entrepreneur. So any way that you can take off the burden, that would be extremely helpful, even more helpful than money. Thirdly, when we speak up, we get attacked. So I'm a target for many attacks. I'm not sure if you are. And emails, Twitter, Reddit, whatever. And so anytime somebody else can take on some of this speaking up or some of this calling out, Anima, how all these people who do it, it is super helpful. Because then your voice is amplified and people don't think you're that one crazy person just saying stuff all the time. People stop listening to you. So for me, these are the 3 things that would be super helpful.
So as a queer person and someone who knows queer people, when we're meeting someone new, when we're going into a new environment, one of the biggest things on our mind is, will this person, will these people, will this company accept us for who we are? And we play all sorts of, crazy games trying to figure this out. But there are some very simple things you can do that will show queer people that, you accept them. Ask for their pronouns when you meet them. Is just a huge one. It's super easy to do. Wear a pronoun sticker on your badge. That's another thing that shows that you care about pronouns. And stop by my workshop on Saturday and grab one of the Queer and AI stickers and just put it on your computer monitor or something. And this isn't everything, but these are very, very simple things that will make a large impact for people.
I think that also there's some simple things that researchers can do in their day-to-day. If you hear somebody say something and you really think it's not appropriate, it's where a lot of us are introverts. I have a hard time speaking up, but it's okay to say, you know what, I don't think that's an okay thing to say here, and could you not? Because a lot of times, a woman will hear somebody say something like, Catherine used the example of somebody saying they wished they were pregnant, so the door could be open for them. That's not really funny, and she can take care of it and take care of it herself, but it's really helpful if an ally does it for you because it has more impact, I think, sometimes on the person who's not probably thinking about what they're saying. And the other thing you can do is always stop by the poster of somebody who might be different in the community and talk to them about the research. Great collaborations can be formed that way, and I think it will lead to better research for you and for the entire community.
Great. Now, Sarah, you're here representing WIML. Can you just give us some insight into the growth, which you see the other affinity groups are newer, and I think it's kind of really great growth to strive for.
So WIML, this is our 13th workshop. We actually started, the first workshop was started by Jen and Hannah, and they actually had it at Grace Hopper the first time. And that was really interesting because I remember them saying, I think was there like 60, 90 people there, and they were like, we thought 5 people, there were 5 women in machine learning, and we discovered all these people. This year we almost had 1,000 women presenting or coming to the workshop. And I think that WIML really gives me a lot of hope for the future for all of these different efforts, because when I started coming to NeurIPS, there were not as many women as there are here. Like, you see them all the time. There's lines in the women's bathroom. There were never lines in the women's bathroom. And there are women now on stage presenting and talking, like Hannah is the program chair. This is something that's very new, different, and I think that it's made the community different. I see more women taking leadership roles, and I see a lot of the women who attended our workshop becoming faculty at great institutions, and so I'm really proud of what it's been able to do to highlight the work of women.
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
So I wanted to add something on the point of what can you do to get more involved with our organizations as well. And one of the things that has not been brought up yet is data sets. So one of the main tenets that our organization is trying to strive for is providing more representation within data, right? And I know that's something that, you know, is important for women, is important for Black in AI and Latinx in AI and queer in AI as well. Ensuring that, because the only way your AI products, your AI research are going to be representative of a larger group, right, is to have that representation in the data set itself. And not only just general representation, but quality representation. Representation that people want to show, right, that this is actually who they are. It's benefiting their culture, right? Obviously, in the US, we have a big problem with AI algorithms being used for recidivism risk, for example, right? Because the data has trended in that way, unfortunately, because of over-policing of different communities. So that's an example where the data is actually bad data, right? This is not data we want to have perpetuated in the future. So how can we find and collect quality data, right, and ensure that this is the data that's being used not only at universities, but at larger companies and furthering on in your own research as well. And so if you want to get involved with our organization or these other organizations and make a difference, also help us collect data, right? You know, that can be done in many different ways, from a simple cell phone app, from sending us data that you guys already have, and then making it available, making it open source, and ensuring that our researchers as well have the opportunity to use it and to work with it so that we can further products and research in the direction that actually benefits our society and our world as a whole.
Oh, can I really quickly say something? This is a huge sticking point for people in Black in AI, and I regularly get emails from frustrated people working in fairness within Black in AI. So a lot of people are working on fairness and machine learning. It's now becoming like this big topic, and it's important to understand the socio-economic structural issues when you're working on fairness and machine learning. If you just have Black people in your intro, and then you're the one benefiting from the publication, and then the people you're talking about are not at all, their lives are not getting better, that's harmful to the community. So, following your suit, in our workshop on Friday, we're going to have a panel on bias in machine learning, but we're going to do something a little different that I don't see a lot in these kind of bias in machine learning panels. We're going to drill in the point of why it's important for you to understand these issues if you're going to work on these kinds of problems, right? So Terrence, one of our keynote speakers, was a victim of these crime recidivism algorithms, and he couldn't travel to Canada. He wanted to come with his family, he wanted to come with his kids, right? And so even though we see our conference as something purely technical, divorced from any sort of other social issues, you saw that a lot of Africans couldn't come because of visa issues, and now our keynote speakers can't come because of these other issues. So really it's important, I think, for us all to understand these social contexts.
Great. Take a question here. What are the opportunities where AI research and development could benefit the progress of underserved communities or the developing world?
So I'm happy to start out. The queer community uses, the internet to connect a lot. There are probably queer people there aren't a lot of us. So technology has really become a central part of how we meet each other, how we interact with each other. This workshop was entirely organized over Slack. None of the people organizing it live in my home city. And with that comes dangers. Data can be breached or otherwise hacked. There's a lot of information about queer people online that could be mined to make problematic or malicious machine learning algorithms. I'm sure that we've all heard of, the gay faces, which very cleverly classified cis gays with their OkCupid pictures. Blaze and one of our panelists, Margaret Mitchell, wrote an excellent criticism of that piece that you should definitely check out if you want more information.
So adding specifically to the question, well, how can AI benefit these developing countries and these other communities as well? If you develop AI to be inclusive, right, to work with different cultures, to take into account different perspectives, that is the only way it can benefit not only these different subgroups, but then also spread to developing countries as well. And if you specifically work with people in those countries and ensure that they are also included to solve the problems there in their countries, then you'll be benefiting them more for the long term, right? It's like that saying, if you give a guy a fish, right, he'll be satiated for dinner, but then if you teach the man to fish, right, then he's going to be happy the rest of his life. So it's kind of that idea. Similarly, if you want to use AI to benefit these different communities, go into those communities, right? Do summer school programs, work with the universities there, ensure that your research is also being involved with their research and that you're including them because they don't necessarily have those opportunities otherwise to connect and grow. And also just having that representation here at a conference like this, this is using AI, no, not technologically, but this is using AI to benefit those countries as well. I mean, from our workshop alone, we brought 60 presenters from Central, South America, Spain, Brazil, everywhere, just to come here to represent themselves, to bring their work. And so we really hope that you can come and talk to them and listen to them. Ours is on Saturday as well. And then see the kind of work that they're doing and get involved going forward in the future.
I really want to add to that, I'm sorry, because this is another sticking point for a lot of people like me. I see as in the, and being Ethiopian, I mean, like growing up in Ethiopia, we saw all of these NGOs. It's an NGO economy, and this is not the way to do it. You can't have like an all-white or all non-African, AI for good or AI for whatever panel and workshop and this and that, and then benefit Africans. It's not going to work. So the first thing to think about is how can AI help you to the person, right? And then listen, and then bring them in, collaborate. If you don't have these collaborations, it's not going to work. It's going to be helicopter size. That's a term that we have for these kinds of things that people find exploitative. So it's going to be more exploitation. So this is a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up, and I would really encourage people to think of it that way.
Great. Thank you. So another question here. I've been having to explain the pronoun stickers to people. Do you have ideas on how to educate people next time regarding trans and non-binary attendance?
Yes, so the pronoun stickers was, or I guess our implementation of them was an awesome first step. Thank you, Hal and Catherine, for really making this happen. We we do recognize that there are things we want to improve on, having better integration. So like having that sticker isn't like something pointing you out, and also better explaining the concepts. I think that we need to work on explanations that cater to different levels of knowledge about this issue and different cultures, because it is a very, it's a, places have very diverse, I'm sorry, I can't find a good phrase for this. Places have very diverse levels of discourse and views on this, and I think we need to tackle that a bit better. And also, feedback would be awesome on this. I'm first to acknowledge queer and AI does not represent transgender and non-binary individuals as well as it should. We want your participation and we want your feedback so we can do a better job in future years.
Great. Okay, the next one is, what has your experience been in your respective affinity group?
Experience
Just in general.
in general.
I think it would be helpful if you have any specific examples that maybe one of your members felt more empowered, when they went back to their day job, or anything along those lines, or like how are you finding people are benefiting from these efforts?
Definitely. Well, this is our first year, of course, hosting the Latinx and AI Coalition, so I'm going to be happy to bring back more stories after this session. But just in the development of this workshop so far, which has taken many months, I have had a lot of people from the community come out and say, thank you very much. I would not have had the opportunity not only to attend this conference, but also to share my work, which is something that is very, very important for them. And then also for them to get the opportunity to connect with these other larger companies and organizations for new job prospects as well. So that's something that I think is incredibly valuable for people, all over the world to come and to be able to do here, and something that I think a lot of people also potentially take for granted that have been coming to these conferences for a long time. So that's what I have really appreciated. And from the people that have stepped up and worked with us on our organization, I think that it has developed a stronger sense of community for them as well. I heard stories of other people in the Latinx community that before our organization got started, they would come to these events and really seriously feel lonely. Oftentimes, maybe just get together for a small lunch or something where they would find like 5 or 10 individuals, right? But it was few and far between. And so to have other people that not only speak the same language as them, but also look like them and can understand what it takes to get here, to Timnit's point as well, for a lot of people from South America, money is a huge barrier to entry. So for them, just the fact that they can get here is really, really important and has to be understood. So, yes.
Because we raise money, we have to document these things, the questions that you asked. And so there's a number of things. First of all, just this year, the whole visa issues thing, I mean, do you really think it would have been on the news if a large group of people didn't exist, right? So it's like people are starting to understand the barriers that are faced by many people. And also I can even point to some specific things, like we have a huge increase in the percentage of Black people being accepted to PhD programs in various places. Like, for example, Cornell had its record. We have, like Joshua was proposing that iClear be held in Africa, and other people, and Hugo, I don't know if he's here, and other people took it seriously, which, I don't know if this would have happened like 5 years ago, because people probably wouldn't have understood how many African researchers are in AI and how many initiatives are happening. And personally, it's been a learning experience for me too, to meet all of the other researchers, Black researchers around the world, and what kinds of works they're doing. I can give you a specific example. Deb, I don't know if Deb is here, but She even emailed me and said that she's from Toronto and she was going to drop out of computer science in general after coming to NeurIPS. After coming to NeurIPS, right? And so her first experience here, she was almost like me. I was like, never again. And then she joined Black in the Eye, and she is gonna do a PhD, and we have papers together, you know. And so we have many of these kinds of things that are documented. Thank you, that are documented.
This has been one of the most, I think, impactful and emotionally fulfilling things I've done in my life. I've seen this conference, I've seen people go from wondering if they were accepted to this conference to finding people they can really relate to, maybe for the first time in their life, building an awesome queer community. You know, I get like these wonderful thank you notes from people all the time, not to sound, I don't know, self-centered, but it feels really nice. I would like to say that it's also been extremely difficult, especially starting out. Like, I'm a second-year PhD student. I'm not paid to do this. I don't have experience in this. This has been a lot of emotion and time from me. I hope my advisor isn't here when I say this. My research has definitely taken kind of a back seat to this. You know, my side job as a PhD student. And I think that, you know, once again, not to sound self-centered, but given that diversity and inclusion initiatives at NeurIPS are in a large part being led by people like me, I think this is something worth keeping in mind, that it is having this impact on these organizers.
Great. Yes.
So I mentioned some of the things we've seen that are positive changes, but some of the things that we consistently heard from our attendees were that many people come to WIML and it's their first time also coming to NeurIPS. And they would say that they loved to have WIML at the beginning of the conference because they would come and they would feel very lonely, and then they would see a familiar face that they had seen at the workshop, and they wouldn't feel like they were all alone in this sea of people. And that has really helped them through and like made it so that they felt more confident to go up to that speaker and like ask them a question or to go up to that poster.
I want to make a testament for WIML. So I am a huge beneficiary of WIML. I would not, the first time I came to this conference was because of WIML. I met the entire Montreal AI ecosystem, you, everybody, because of WIML, because I met Negar. And so I would not have continued to come here if it wasn't for WIML. I wouldn't want to wanted to have start another affinity group if it wasn't for WIML. So like we really owe it to all of you for doing this. And to your point, I mean, this is something that maybe the board should understand and a whole bunch of other people should understand. To say that my research has suffered is a complete understatement. My research is not going on right now whatsoever, you know, so again, you know, but like, yeah, so, you know, it's not, it's 40 plus hours of just doing, not just doing stuff, but attacks and dealing with all sorts of things. And for me this year, it's been better because of, sadly, other people like Azinia who's sitting there dealing with visa issues. She's a PhD student who's spending 40 plus hours a week. So everybody's been spending 40 plus hours a week, and it's really not a sustainable thing for us to do.
Thank you. Wow, that's just a lot of great information, I think, for the organization to consider, you know, as we all move forward. And again, we're also listening and learning from everybody up here as well. Let me have another question here. Whose voices are most missing from this conversation right now, and what can we do to amplify them? Anybody?
So I'll start it by saying I'm a cis gay man. I grew up in the U.S. In like you know, middle upper class family. I am like the very most privileged of the queer spectrum of people. There's so much diversity in the queer community that I don't represent, and I don't have the knowledge and experience to properly represent. And I hope in future years there will be other people up here that are able to represent different aspects of that.
I think that some of the people who aren't represented are also the people where you can't actually see some of the differences. I mean, you were mentioning Africa, it's a poorer kind of like continent, but there's also a lot of people who grew up in the US who don't have the same availability of education, and so we tend to not see in our PhD programs, and thus not hear people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
I want to echo that as representatives of these organizations, we all have had some privilege, right, to be here today and to be able to stand with confidence and to do the work that we're doing. So I know for me, I would love to have other representatives of my Latinx NAI organization up here, right, that speak primarily Spanish or Portuguese, or, you know, that have come primarily from other countries so that they can feel more represented and that they have a seat at the table. You know, my father was a refugee from Colombia and immigrated into the US, but I'm, you know, born American, and that is a privilege. And even if, you know, our schools in the US can oftentimes be poorer, you know, I still have a lot of privilege because of that. And having those people here from other countries and telling their story would be incredibly valuable. And then, as you said, other people with potentially disabilities would be very, very valuable for them to share their experience as well.
I'm just going to co-sign to what you all said. Basically, the intersectionality, the less privileged of the, you know, people in the affinity groups. And so when all these reporters, for example, are asking about visa issues, I really want them to talk to the people who have been experiencing these visa issues. Their voices are the ones that we want to be heard, and the people who have who can't be here because of so many different kinds of barriers, and like those are the voices I think that are missing.
Great. Yeah, the first thought that came to me was the disabilities community, to have them at the table and part of the conversation as well. And that, again, something to look forward to. Okay, so I'm going to do a round robin and ask everybody to answer this one simple question. Where would you like to see NeurIPS with diversity and inclusion in 5 years? Who would like to take that first?
So this is a very difficult question. My answer is that we need more data. Hal and Catherine's survey was an awesome starting point, and we need to use that to figure out where we are and use that to improve. You know, that being said, as the leader of Queer and AI, I can tell you from my survey, 2/3 of the queer people at NeurIPS are not out. I would like to see that improve a lot. I would like to see, you know, there are queer people delivering keynotes, workshop talks, all sorts of things at this conference, but they aren't out. I would like to see that change. I would like to see there be role models and mentors within the queer community. But this is just one part of a very broad and challenging problem.
I can say something first, maybe. So maybe not 5 years, it's hard to predict, but I could say something for maybe 1 year ahead. So not everybody is equally interested in this issue. And I would like everybody to be open-minded to what's going on. And for instance, start using the name NeurIPS, so take that seriously, because every time you do it, there's a microsecond in your head that you think about this issue, and you become more aware of the problem. So open-mindedness to what's going on, I think is a progress.
So I'll say an ideal case scenario, which obviously is not going to happen in 5 years. The ideal scenario is that none of us, our organizations, would be necessary. So self-destruction is the ultimate goal. Like, we don't want to exist, you know. So it's not like we don't want these organizations to exist. Clearly, that's not going to happen in 5 years. I'm really bad at. So in 5 years, I don't know if I have anything to add to what you said. So like people kind of embrace not having to explain why we exist is a first goal. Not explaining to people that it's not a special benefit that we have, like Kat's example of you know, a pregnant woman, someone opened the door for her and somebody was like, oh, I wish I was pregnant so that, you know, someone could also open the door for me. That change in attitude would get us a lot into many places. Specifically, I would say the economic barriers. So when we give out grants, for example, travel grants for volunteers, or for NeurIPS has these travel grants, how can we make it such that we pay for people in advance? Because literally a lot of people will not be able to come if that's how we have travel grants. Visa issues. I would love for visa issues not to be even mentioned, for it not to be an issue. So yeah, these are the specific things I'm thinking about.
So from a board's point of perspective, I would like to say that what I hope that we manage to achieve during the next couple of years is to really set up the structures that this conference needs to be able to address all these diversity issues. I mean, we started with some very few first steps with the code of conduct, with having diversity chairs, with having this meeting here. But surely we need many more also professional structures to support diversity. And from my point of view, the goal of the board should be to establish these structures during the next couple of years, so then we are better in place to deal with all the diversity.
I would honestly love to see this conference happening in many other countries. I know that they've already talked about iClear happening in Africa, but South America, India, Saudi Arabia, if we can just do this in many different places and then be able to take into account all those different cultures. And going back to your point, the other voices that aren't necessarily represented, right? There are other brown people too, right? Not just Black in AI and Latinx in AI that maybe have been accepted in other ways, right? Especially within the tech community. I know people of Indian descent oftentimes are in a funny, kind of in a funny place because they are more represented within technology, but they're still people of color, right? And so it's hard for them sometimes to also see themselves within, the data or to feel represented, via their language. So also taking that into account, I hope that people can start to see and acknowledge those differences in those communities as well, and be able to go to this conference and many other countries and really celebrate those differences and that intersectionality.
So definitely echo the idea of that we would not be here, our groups would not be here anymore, and everyone was working on research again. But I think additionally, maybe it would be in 5 years great to start seeing more positive news stories where we were seeing AI finding, helping groups that are typically unrepresented, instead of stories where we're seeing that people are being discriminated against in job placement, et cetera, because the algorithm was mostly trained on men, for example. So if we could start to see more data sets and more examples of AI catching bias in a company, for example, and helping it fixed, I think that would be a great example.
I have something really quick to add. So one very concrete goal for 5 years from now is everyone who wants to attend NeurIPS is able to. It is, in my opinion, not ethical for NeurIPS to present itself as the premier academic and networking conference and exclude several thousand people because the venue wasn't big enough. I know, personally, several brilliant queer women, brilliant researchers, brilliant leaders who weren't able to be here today because of registration. This is a very concrete and solvable problem that I hope will be addressed soon.
Great, thanks. Well, as we wrap up, as you can see, it really comes down to dialogue and collaboration, which then will result in inclusion. And everything that you all work on, again, is touching people every day. Maybe it wasn't as much 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, but it is today. And in order to maximize your work, we need diverse perspectives at the table at the very beginning, because otherwise then we're dealing with a lot of these catch-up issues that could have been avoided, early on with your amazing work. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is the first of, we hope, to be an annual event. And we will continue the dialogue. As I mentioned, you can continue to submit questions. You can send me an email at diversity@neurips.cc. I also want to thank these leaders. I fully appreciate the volunteer hours that you are putting into it. And I think for those of us that embark on this kind of work, it's a labor of love. And if we don't pave the way now for the people that are coming up behind us, nothing will ever change. So I want to thank you so much for participating, but also for your work. And with that, it's a wrap. So thank you.